Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio. Can you see what I've got here? It's the pineapple quilt. Now I know Liz has been putting out some bits through our social media, so I think she's done something through Instagram and Facebook. I'm not sure she did anything in YouTube, asking about what colour border you would put on to the pineapple quilt. And the result was, by I think about one vote, black, which was good because my vote, if we add my vote to that, I was thinking black. I was seeing black in my mind for two reasons. One, because I think it really makes these colours really stand out. And also it ties in the centre of the blocks with the border, or the border with the centre of the quilt. So we're going for black. So today I'm going to be adding the borders to this quilt. Now I've just left this laid out like this for the moment to show you how I determine the size I'm going to cut. And I do everything by eye. And all I've done is I've just sort of laid my fabric out ready for me to cut. But before I'm going to cut, I just sort of place the quilt on there and just move it until I have got something which looks proportionately correct to my eye. Sometimes it can look too narrow, sometimes it looks a bit wide, but I've determined that this is about the right width that I want to see to frame the whole of this beautiful scrappy quilt. So let's just see where I put the tape measure. What I need to do first, so we're going to cut 5-inch borders, so we're going to cut it at 5.5. Oh, I put it back. So we're going to do 5.5, so that's 5 inches. So let's just double check my maths. Yep, we've got 5 inches. Now, the moment that's got selvage on, it really is just for me to determine the size, so I'm not worried about that. Now, the second thing I'm going to do while I've got the tape measure in hand is just measure the width of my quilt. Now, if my blocks have come out accurately, it should measure 40.5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 40.5. Oh, that was a... Ooh. Yeah, I'm slightly over that way. I'm actually more like 40 3/4. So what I normally do at home is just sort of make a little note of that. And then I've measured the other way just because it's hard to do on camera, and it's 48.5 the other way because we've actually got 5x6. So it was 30 blocks, grid 5x6, 8-inch finished blocks, so 8.5. So it should be 48.5, and I have measured it the other way. So we're ready now. We've done our measurements. I'm just going to take this off very carefully and just put it, I'm just going to put it over here. Sorry, I'm just stepping off camera just to keep that out the way, but sort of folded because I've given it a good press. So it's just to say that as well. Before I start, I've pressed the quilt centre and I've pressed flat my background fabric here. Now this is a Modabella Solid just in black. I think there's different ones. I had a look at Raven, but Raven is sort of more like a dark charcoal black than a black. So this is in black. Now I've folded that in half, but what I will say is my selvage edge is going this way. I need 48.5 inches in length. So what I tend to do where I can with borders is actually cut it all in one long strip. So I've actually got a piece of fabric here that's 1 metre, so that's 40 inches by 1.25 metres, so 40 by 50 inches. And I'm going to cut my borders parallel to the selvage so I can get a 50-inch strip so I don't have to be piecing any of the borders. So that's the first benefit of doing that. The second benefit of doing that is it's a little bit more, less give, parallel to the selvage. So when we say parallel, there's the selvage running down that way, and I'm going to be cutting my strips that way. Normally we go selvage to selvage, which is across the width of the strip, but I'm actually going lengthwise because there's slightly less give, there's slightly less stretch in that direction. So if you have problems with your borders going on a little bit wavy, that helps to prevent that a little bit. So that's another top tip of cutting parallel to the selvage. Some people do that for their log cabin blocks to avoid some of the distortion in log cabins. They'll cut their strips parallel to the selvage rather than across the width of the fabric. So I'm just going to line everything up there as best I can. Also, just to say, I've best pressed and ironed my fabric. We want to be cutting our fabric when it's as flat as possible. If we're cutting our fabric with creases in it, that's altering the size of our cut slightly. That's particularly important when we're piecing. So my first strip, I'm going to cut 5.5 because I want 5-inch finished. So we're going to take a little bit off for the seam allowances. And I'm what I call overcutting. So I'm actually lining up my ruler there and I'm making sure my 5.5 is just inside that selvage strip. So this first cut, and I'm just going to double check because it's measure twice, cut once. So I've definitely got the ruler the right way round. My 5.5 is there. My selvage is underneath that square bit. I've got the fold of my fabric there, so I've got a straight line. And we're going to cut. That's a bit scary, isn't it, the first cut? I'm going to just set one aside, but we've got to trim that again in a minute. So 5.5 again. So I'm going to reline up my ruler along the bottom and along this edge. And I'm going to cut. So we want four strips, one for each side of the quilt. Well, there's a nice sharp blade in this, I think. Katrina's might have changed the blade in this because I haven't. Particularly important when you're going through, because I'm going through 4 layers here, that your blade's nice and sharp. Right, so that's our 4 pieces. So we've got that left. So if we wanted to do a black binding, there's loads there for a black binding. There's also enough there for the borders on another quilt this size. So let's just go back and trim this one. Now that fabric's just moved. So that's the selvage gone. So that's fairly quick cuts, 4 pieces ready to put on our quilt. So let's move to the next bit. So we just did a little clear out and reset up just so that makes it sort of easier for you. Now I've remeasured my quilt because I sort of doubted it when that tape measure was telling me a slightly different, my tape measure at home was telling me a slightly different measurement. So I've actually measured it with this. Now the thing with tape measures is sometimes they can stretch. So, you know, they're a good guide, but sometimes not always accurate, particularly if you've had that tape measure for a long time. So I've double checked the measurements of my quilt using this because there's no stretch in that acrylic ruler. And it's actually come out at 48 3/4 by 40 3/4. So I'm going to go with this because I'm now going to trim 2 of the sides. I'm going to start with the sides and I'm going to trim it to size. I'm going to actually show you 2 different ways of putting borders on. Now some people like to trim all of the pieces and fit it on, and that's also a good way of stopping your borders from sort of having a wave put into them. I'm going to show you how to measure and put it on, and then I'm also going to show you another technique that I sometimes use when, you know, I want a bit of a cheat and a bit of a fast track and I don't necessarily want to be sort of sat measuring my borders. But where I can, I like to measure my borders and pin them on and sew them. So I've got 2 pieces of fabric for the sides, as I said, and I'm starting with the sides because it's 48 3/4. This is 50 inches long, so it means that I can get my cuts from both of those. But once we add the borders on, of course, that measurement is going to grow again. And we should hopefully then get our other 2 cuts out of those 2 pieces. So let's just start here with 40 3/4. So I've got the fabric folded in half, sorry, that was my brain doing maths, and I need to divide that by 2 because it's folded over. My folded edge is there, make sure you're not trimming the folded edge. So I need to measure 24 3/8 if my maths serves me correctly. Now this is a 24.5 inch ruler. So 24 3/8. Now I'm going to measure this because this is a bit of an odd, and just make sure that I'm measure twice, cut once again, that I've got that right. So that is 24 1/4. So we're just going to move it up a notch, and that should be 24 3/8. Now I'm going to double check Now this might be slightly off, but it should, just because I'm not. 24, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think this tape measure, I think it's slightly off. So I'm going to go with the ruler, 24 3/8. Let's just double check that. 24 and 1, 2, 3/8. Yep, I'm happy. I am happy. Right, so we're going to cut this off. Hold our breath. We have got spare fabric, so, you know, if I do go wrong. Now, before we cut the second one, let's just pin that on and just check. They say we do it wrong once, we do it wrong twice, don't we? So let's just grab the quilt, which I've put there. I think it's that tape measure is slightly off. It's not measuring the same as the ruler. Right, let's put you there. So the sides, let's get this in the right orientation. Ooh. I always tend to start with the longest sides on borders. Now I'm just going to make sure that's hard to tell which is the top and which is the bottom. I think that's the back of the quilt. Right, so let's grab my pins. I've hidden them. Right, this is going to be a bit boring because I've got to pin on a whole long row. So I won't say anything profound, and we'll probably fast forward through this bit. So see you in a minute. Okay, so that's all pinned. Now you probably noticed I cut my second strip because when I put my first one on, that fitted exactly. So the 48 3/4 was the correct measurement. Also, you'll notice as I was pinning, a couple of times I sort of went back and removed some pins and just sort of flattened the fabric out a bit. And sometimes you just need to do that. It doesn't always sort of lay completely flat from the beginning. See, I'm just faffing there. Now the other thing I do as well, once I've got a couple of pins in at the beginning, I put a pin at the end because if that strip is the right length, that thing should, the border should fit exactly. We don't want to be pushing or pulling at any point. We don't want to ease anything in because that's when we get the sort of waves in our borders if we're doing that. So we want everything to be laying flat, both of those pieces just fitting on top of each other sort of naturally, if you like. So we've got that on both of the sides now. So next step is we need to sew on the sides. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine and I've changed out the thread to a grey, a dark grey, just because of the black, and I don't want anything too light under there. So grey, just to say, grey is what they sort of call a shadow colour, so it tends to sort of blend in quite well with everything. So I'm just going to be sewing both borders on, and yeah, they may put me into warp speed for this as well because it's just two big long lines of straight sewing. So there we go. That's the two side borders put on, and they're laying nice and flat. So I'm really pleased with that. Now, I'm not going to measure this because I'm going to show you a second way of putting borders on if you don't want to be doing the measuring. And that is just to sew your strip on as it is without pre-cutting. So the other thing to say, actually, if you're getting wavy borders as you put them on, I always sew it with the border piece on top. And if you've got a walking foot, put your walking foot on, because the whole idea, or a dual feed, the whole idea with those is it will feed both layers in at the same rate. Now, I haven't put the walking foot on for this, so you know, you don't have to have a walking foot, but if you find when you're putting your borders on, you're getting sort of ripples in it, you can, as I say, put walking foot on, and that will help that as well. Now, I'm going to pin this again, but we're not going to cut it to size. And hopefully we should just have enough fabric there to go on. Now, because my quilt measured slightly differently, I should know, because I think I said 1.25 meters of this black fabric. Mine's actually slightly more. I measured it and it's actually 152. So 150 might be a bit, sorry, no, 50 inches. So 1.25, so what I was trying to say. So you might need a little bit more than 1.25. So you might want to go up to 1.5, depending on how big your blocks have come out. I did redo my maths and I thought, yeah, actually, I think 50 inches might be a bit tight. So, but these strips are 52. It was slightly more than 1.25 meters that I had. On the strips. Yeah, see, I've only got about 1 inch hanging off, so you're going to probably need a bit more. But like I say, measure your blocks and work out what they've come out at. Now, I don't need to pin both edges. I'm just going to make sure it's all lying nice and flat for this one. And we're going to do the same again. And then we'll take it to the machine and sew. Now, I've just set that seam, but before I press that seam back, I'm actually going to trim now. Now, you can fold that back, but you just have to make sure that when you're doing that trim, you've got everything square, and you can lay a large square onto that to make sure. But I like to trim while this is this way, because then what I'll do is take a large ruler and I can line it up with the top of the fabric there and the seam here, so I know I've got a nice right angle, because sometimes what can happen when you press that open is when you do your trim, you can sort of go off on a bit of an angle a little bit and it's not quite so accurate. So I like to trim it with the fabric still like that, so you can sort of see there's about 1 inch left from that. So that would have taken 51 inches. And I think that's side. A little bit to trim, so let's just do that, and I'll do that from this side. But same again, I'm just going to use the edge of my fabric here, and it really is a tiny little bit. I'm going to get rid of it. There. These not so important in a border, but definitely important when we're piecing. So now I've trimmed, I can press that seam back. do the same again. So let's clear some space here and see how it's looking. This is the scary moment, isn't it? How has it all gone? Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. We're not going to get it all in shot. It's too big, it's too big. There we are. Now have I got the right way round? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. Now I think what we'll do is perhaps hang it up and we'll get a nice sort of shot of all of it for you so you can see how it's all looking. But that's the borders on the pineapple quilt. So I hope you enjoyed that. Like I say, there's probably quite a lot of fast forward because we had quite a lot of repetitive sort of sewing and pressing going on with that one. But I'm really pleased with how that's come out. Next decision I'll need to make is how to do the binding, whether I'm just going to keep it all black just to frame it all, or whether I'm going to bring some of the colour into the binding as well. I don't know. I'll do some auditioning to see how it looks and make that decision. So, but first of all, I've got to get it layered and quilted, haven't I? Picking the backing as well. Still lots to do, but really pleased with how this is coming out. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that took part in the poll and commented and liked and did all of those wonderful things. Like I say, in Instagram and Facebook, I know these went out as well as on YouTube, but I'm really pleased with how this is coming out. So thanks again, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.